All right. Okay, you can hear me. I can hear me. Okay, here's a messy paragraph. You shouldn't read it. I've grayed it out, so, you know. Begin messy paragraph. Later, I learned about my time on the Chickasaw farm through my dad's photographs. He had a camera, a Brownie. I learned much later, like as I'm typing this, and remembering how that camera looked, and how the camera Lincoln Clark's holds on the back of his book about junkie prostitutes, heroines, looks, and how the camera my friend's father used to shoot her wedding a couple nights ago, a father who did not appear to be a drunken, scary mess, as my boyfriend's father had described him. In fact, if I had to spend time with my boyfriend's father, or my friend's father, I'd definitely choose the latter used. These cameras were Brownies, just like my dad's. And my mom's. There were pictures with my dad in them that my mom must have taken, I realize. And I have to admit they're as good as the ones my dad takes. There was one in particular. My dad in the foreground, holding my newest brother, Michael, followed by Stanley, my oldest brother, then me, holding a poor cat all stretched out and uncomfortable. Then my younger sister, Sandra, who was laughing and holding her hands between her legs like a little 2-year-old Marilyn Monroe. We're sitting on the edge of the wooden porch that wraps around the yellow house. It must have been a good time. Everyone's smiling and laughing like that. A beautiful, sunny summer day. We're all in short sleeves or no sleeves. Dad's hair just beginning to thin. My mother took that photo. It's good. End messy paragraph. What are you trying to say? My friend Wayne says. What's wrong with him, I think? You have to let yourself go and get lost in it. You have to understand that the meaning is the emotion. I don't say this. Instead, I try to tell him what I am trying to say. That my mother was a good photographer, as good as my dad. The picture I described, for instance, captures facial expressions and personalities. We're all in a row. The way my mom has framed that photo, she highlights that. She uses the line we're sitting in to cut across the snapshot, but not halfway, the way a lesser photographer would. We move away from the camera. She plays with perspective. When I looked at the photos, I always assumed they were my dad's because the camera was his. My mom's possessions were her clothes, her jewelry, items used to clean the house or cook. Everything else was dad's. That's just the way it was at my house. So I assumed that any photographs were created were his, and by extension, that he had created them. However, my mother took many of these photos, like the one I described. When I was staring at photos, admiring what I thought was the work of my father, half the time I was admiring the work of my mother, and I didn't know it. I was trying to understand my father, know him through his art, because he spoke so little and interacted with us, his children, so infrequently. So while I believed I was getting to know my father through these pictures, I was only half getting to know him and half getting to know a side of my mother that I'd never met in my day-to-day interactions with her. My father was almost completely hidden behind my mother, and she, behind a role she thought she had to play as a mother, wife, and woman. My mother could not be a photographer, though she could be photographed. And my father could not be a person who had a relationship with his children, though he could provide for them. I was looking for my dad in those photos. While I did find him somewhat, I also found my mother. But until I wrote that messy paragraph, I didn't recognize either of them. Now I'm going to jump to a poetic piece that hopefully is a little twisted. At the second farm in Dardanelle, the photographs are kept, some in albums and some in an old dress box in the upstairs closet near the bathroom. The dress box has a blue stripe running diagonally 7 or 8 inches from one corner. Templeton's, it says. Templeton's is the variety store in Dardanelle. Isn't it strange how a variety store gets renamed department store when it gets large enough? At Templeton's, we bought birthday presents for Mom, Dad, and sometimes each other. Obviously, at some point, someone bought a dress. Unless I'm completely mistaken, and the box said Simpson, Sears, Eaton's, or something else entirely. Templeton's was a place for last-minute purchases. Clothing, not made by Mom, was usually bought in Fayetteville or Arbor, the nearest cities. Never in lowly Dardanelle. These photographs had crimped edges, little half moons all around the squareness of them, cut into the white borders, as if someone with very steady hands and an excellent eye had used a paper hole punch all around, making those half moon shapes. Some of the photos are sharp, like a veneer. There's one of my mother's face beside the front window, driver's side, of the red and white car we had, for example. And another from the winter, me standing on an ice-covered puddle, holding the reins to an old-timey sled with 2 rails underneath like skates. In that photo, my cheeks are all puffed up and red in the middle, surrounded by pale skin, which is surrounded again by a dark blue snowsuit, up and tightly tied. A little bit of woolen toque, or acrylic, or whatever they used in those days to make fake wool, peeks out from my hood across the top of my head. The hat is dark colored, the color I'm describing not really there, in the photo I mean, in each memory I have of me inspecting the photo. There are color photos, scattered among the black and whites. There's not as many though, and they're not as good. I guess I didn't need them. I could remember the events in them. So there's this round face, lips pressed together, as if about to blow out birthday candles. Or maybe more like someone holding their breath. Encased by a hood, attached to a puffy-looking body, I must be wearing a lot of layers. It looks like it would be hard to move. I've got rain and snowproof boots on, rubber. I look like one of those babushkas painted on those Russian dolls inside dolls. The contrast between my skin and the snowsuit is matched by the contrast between the puddle and its snow-dusted cracks. There are barns and a light-colored house behind me against a white, cloudy sky. I don't actually know what the background is. I think there's at least one building behind me, and my father's red and white Valiant, though in the picture, of course, it's black and white. The contrast is fine and perfect, no blurriness, no bleed from one element into another. Me, against cold and sky, on ice that is smooth and slippery, cracking, though the cracks are beneath the surface. That isn't snow in them, I realize, just the way ice cracks growing from below. I'm standing. Maybe not for long, maybe that's why I'm holding my breath. Gray sky, white sky, dark gray ice, black snowsuit, black boots, black mittens, rain and snowproof, round moon face, blowing out imaginary candles, or, yes, I'm holding my breath, not falling, while my mom takes her perfect, oh, so clean and organized, photograph. God is in and God is out. Baby's gonna scream and shout. Try to stop her, don't you dare. Try to love her, you don't care. See your pictured perfect world, wonder why the edge is curled. That's the working of your touch. Worked those babies way too much. Now they sit in calm array, hoping for your death. 1980. Ava Mueller is the narrator of this book. I watch trees and fields pass, feeling the rumble of the car as it goes over gravel and potholes. Then we hum over a paved road, but in a different direction than normal. We're not going to church. We're not going to grandma's. We're not going to the other grandmas, and we're not going to my cousin's. There it is, says Mom. I stand on the bump that divides the foot area of the car's back seat and follow her hand with my eyes. The house sits in the middle of grassy fields at the end of a long lane. It's red brick, and there's a barn behind it with a silo, one of those octagon wooden ones. It looks bare. We had so many trees at the place we're leaving. We turn onto the lane, pocked with large puddles. Dad slows, easing the car through or around the holes, but there's a lot of jostling movement from side to side. I hold tight to the back of the front seat. No one says a word. There's a strange room above the kitchen of the new house. It's dark. It's lit by two small east-facing windows, or a lone light bulb that hangs from the ceiling. It's cooler than the rest of the house. It's almost empty. There are no walls. Well, there are walls, but they don't have paint or wallpaper on them. They're just faded old boards. It doesn't have a floor either. Well, it does, but it's just faded old boards. The ceiling slopes down from the middle of the room on two sides. The ceiling, like the walls and the floor, is more old boards. The door to enter the room is so small that adults have to duck to get in through it. There are two posts reaching up to the ceiling's peak. There's a picture on the farthest from the entrance. You stare at it. It's surrounded by an elaborate frame. You think it's of a woman. You step gingerly across the boards until you're under the picture, looking up. You're right. She has thick brown hair that falls softly to her shoulders, then cascades past. She's pale, pretty. She's not smiling. She wears old-fashioned clothes, not a dress, but a white sleeveless top and matching poofy pants that stop at her knees. Both the top and pants have tiny holes with embroidery all around, all over, and crimping around the edges where her neck, arms, and legs emerge. She has one leg up on a box or something. One of her hands is on her hip. She looks directly at you. She's surrounded by a dark, gleaming frame of tiny, carved half circles, almost like a mass of curls, only much tighter than the ones on her head. The width of each side of this frame is a fraction of an inch smaller than the width of the actual picture in the middle. You feel like you shouldn't be looking at this woman, but you can't help it. You wonder why Mr. Kearney would leave a photo of his wife behind. Thanks a lot, guys.